engage in a conversation with other members, please do so through me. And finally, each vote taken in this meeting will be conducted by roll call votes. Okay, now I'm going to remind everyone who isn't first and last name to please change it. If anyone hasn't done that yet, I'm not going to scroll through 6 screens to check. Just reminding you, and I'm also reminding you about mute. So please mute your phone or computer if there's somebody that's, I can hear an echo, so that would be great. May I get an approval of the agenda?
Move approval.
Second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor, Stephen Morey?
Aye.
George, thanks for raising your hand. Peter Schaefer?
Aye.
Joanna Roche?
Aye.
Jill Veith?
Aye.
Joe Grouse?
Aye.
Thank you. Okay, now we have, this section is public comment and not related to Article 90. So if there's anyone who wants to make a public comment, you need to use the raise hand button. Okay, I will now close public comment. We don't have any meeting minutes, and is there anyone who has a committee report they want to share before I move on to the next agenda item? Okay, thank you. Okay, so our next agenda item is review and discussion of the annual town meeting warrant article number 90, sponsored by Tobias Glidden, bylaw licensing of short-term rentals. Here's how this is going to work. After our meeting on January 14th, we put together, FinCom put together a series of questions that we needed as follow-up questions to further discuss this article. Some of them went to Tobias and Julia from Act Now, and then others went to town administration. So I am going to go through all of the questions, asking Tobias and Julia to respond to the questions, starting with Act Now. Then I will go to Libby Gibson on behalf of town administration, and she and Ken and Brian will respond to the questions we have that were for town. And then after that, I will ask the finance committee members for any further questions they have. Once we've exhausted all of that, then we will get to the public comment portion of the response to Article 90. So public comment is not open at this time and will not be open until the 3 things I just said will happen. Okay? Great.
Denise,
Peter?
are we going to be able to ask questions on each question, the members of the finance committee?
Sure, that's probably the most efficient way to do it. So I will, that's probably the most efficient way to do it, because if we go back, it's too much toing and froing. Thank you, Peter, for that process improvement suggestion. Thank you. Okay, so.
Madam Chair, I'm
yes.
just going to state for the record that on the advice of town council, I need to recuse as a member of the finance committee, and I'll be listening and potentially commenting as a member of the public.
Thank you, Stephen. Okay. Okay, hi, Julia. How are you?
I'm good, thanks.
Good. So I had sent this to you a couple weeks ago, so you had plenty of time to look it over. And so we'll just go question by question. And thank you for your preparation for today. I appreciate it for both you and Tobias. So first question that I had sent you was, what financial impact do you think this will have on Nantucket's economy?
Tobias, did you want to just start off with a little opening before we get into the answers? Is that okay, Madam Chairman?
If you keep it brief, please, Tobias, because we did have a, on January 14th, we were able to understand it. So yeah, please do, and keep it brief, and then we'll go into the questions. That'd be great.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to kind of, in the spirit of keeping it brief, I wanted to reach out to everyone who's on the call and say thank you for your feedback. We've heard a lot of it. And say, a lot of folks have reached out to me and said, how is this going to impact us? How is this being communicated, X, Y, and Z? And so I wanted to read a little piece for you. First off, this process in my mind really started 2 years ago when I approved the Neighborhood First article to authorize $30 million for affordable housing to protect the community from 40Bs. It was unclear at that time exactly how it was going to help and how it was going to be implemented. But with the FinCom's input and community engagement in recognizing that 40Bs were a problem, we're able to come together and arrive at a solution, which was about a $20 million article with other technical changes, which voters strongly endorsed at town meeting. This collaboration paved the way for long-term protections of un-40 friendly bees. I hope the FinCom will support the debt exclusion for 7.5 million to maintain the production of 40 bees going on for the next 5 years. And lastly, everyone agrees there's a problem. The vast majority of people agree that there should be reasonable regulations on short-term rentals. Nantucket's main economic driver for the last 50 years has been tourism. Vacation rentals by homeowners have been part of that picture. However, new short-term rentals are coming to the market and they are investments in businesses. This industry is projected to double in the next 10 years, which means our year-round homes will be priced out. We continue to be targeted. We've said it before. We've lost 600 year-round homes over the last 10 years. What about the next 10 years? What makes Nantucket special is its people. What is Nantucket without people? I know today is about hearing from the public thoughts on this article, and I hope that after today's meeting, we can sit down with the town to discuss how to improve this article and strike a balance between all the various pieces. So I'm just here to listen. So thank you.
Tobias, okay. Julia, what financial impact do you think this will have on Nantucket's economy?
So we, as Tobias kind of pointed out, we do think that the article as currently written could have some impacts on Nantucket, on the economy, on tourism. Doing nothing has its own set of impacts over the long-term stability of the community and the economy. And I think that, Tobias kind of pointed out pretty clearly that we hope that from the feedback that we're receiving, we can improve the article, and that, we can end up with crafting something that's reasonable, if you like, for everyone. The demand for vacation rentals will continue to be strong. That's not something that's set to slow down. If anything, it's going to keep on going at the same rate, and support services will still be in great demand. The demand for the services on Nantucket is clearly in excess of local supply. I think that that's not coming from us. It's coming from, I guess as recently as the Nantucket Data Platform with their effective population study that said that I think it was around 600 people who traveled daily for months around the year on the boat to perform services like landscaping or caretaking or house cleaning. So the demand is clearly very strong. We chose not to put specific numbers to this type of question. Frankly, Madam Chair, it could be, I have to try to find you on my screen now. I can't see you anymore. It could be seen as a number of different ways. And I think that what we're hearing is that maybe the impact would be not palatable. And so we're here to talk about ways to make it more palatable. So certainly if someone was to calculate numbers on the impact to the town, we'd say that it might make more sense to look at a number of things, right? Not just the lodging tax. And so there'd be both positive and negatives, not just the lodging tax, but certainly the impact to the landfill, to sewer and water, to resources that are being expended on short-term rentals by the police and the health department, to housing initiatives, and et cetera. So if this is important to the finance committee and to make this exercise sort of more helpful, it might make more sense to, sort of sit down and talk through some of the assumptions that we could agree on.
Okay, thank you. Finance committee, any comments or questions to that? Peter Schaefer?
Yeah, Julia, you said that it'll be less use of the sewer system, et cetera. But at the same time, if people can't rent their house, they're going to use it more. So I think that it negates that comment that you had.
Madam Chair, if I may, so what we know from looking at some of the data that we can have, right? There's a lot of data that's not public in this realm, but some data is public. And what we do know is that from looking at the average short-term rental has a capacity of about 8, a little over 8 people in terms of an entire home, which is the large majority of the short-term rentals. So if you think about that and you think about how many people are in a home on a regular basis, it's sort of debatable, but I think that we hear anecdotally that certainly in the short-term rental market, in the entire home market, that those homes are being utilized maybe at a higher degree of capacity than, let's say, a homeowner might use their home, or even a second homeowner. So I don't have data about how second homeowners or homeowners use their homes in terms of capacity on a regular basis. So it's hard to compare, but certainly from the anecdotes that we talk to the caretakers or whatnot, there is a high degree of capacity in terms of some of these homes.
Jill, you raised your hand.
Yeah, I just want to tie a couple things together that you said, Tobias. When you brought up neighborhood first, I know that you had, I believe your intention for that article was to buy existing properties. That's not what's happened. That money's now been spent on plots of land to build really much more high density developments. And that in itself is going to potentially add to the sewer and water and infrastructure issues that now Julia's bringing up as a concern. So I wonder if you've thought that through, because I know that you've based this article, it seems to me, completely on, what can we do? This will help affordable housing.
Yeah, so maybe to respond in 2 points. One, I really proposed the article with Rick Atherton and Ernest that we could buy individual properties. However, we were 5 years late. Property values have been skyrocketing on the bottom. And so it didn't become feasible to meet the objectives to defeat 40Bs and stay within safe harbor unless you build some units. Secondly, when we talk about affordable housing as an aspect of this article, it's very clear that we've lost 600 homes. Year-round homes have transitioned into short-term rentals, and a number of seasonal homes as well. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I just think the rate of which it will continue will inhibit the ability for us to have a year-round community. An economy is based on homes and people living in homes, especially in America. And I don't believe having an economy that has one set of folks just renting out properties as an investment is positive in the long run for the community. I think there's definitely a place for short-term rentals. I think they're a part of Nantucket's history, but I think allowing them to continue to eviscerate neighborhoods is not a solution we can afford. And I think if we look across the country and across the globe, there are hundreds of communities that have engaged in these questions and have come to reasonable solutions on how to balance their economy and their need for affordable housing. The two are interconnected.
Tobias, I would like to stop you there because we're on question 1 and I've got 20 questions. So thank you. And also you made those points on January 14th. So I would really ask everyone to not remake point. I'm sorry, my dogs are attacking the mail. They hate catalogs. That's the noise you hear in the background. I would really ask, they really hate catalogs. You should see it. It's a bloodbath in my entryway here. I would ask everyone to please not repeat things that have already been said, because we really want to get as much new information as possible. Does the Finance Committee have any other questions on the first question, which was what financial impact do you think you'll have on this town? If not, I'm going to move on to question 2. Joanna?
Okay, yes. The question that I have really is around the metrics that you're using to define this. right? So I don't necessarily see a common language in the sense of the metrics that you are describing in terms of the financial impact of the town, and the metrics that all the people who are responding to this article are using to determine the impact on the town. So what are the crossover points? Where is any commonality?
You mean, so can you just expand on what commonality do you mean?
So in terms of the financial impact on the town, you know, I think part of what we heard from you guys in your presentation was a set of impacts on the town financially. And then I think over the course of the last month, we've heard from many members of the community who raised many other metrics, right? Or impacts financially. But there's not a lot of crossover points in terms of what you guys are agreeing on. So I would like it to be stated what things you do agree on in terms of the financial impact on the town.
Okay, so if I understood correctly, I understood sort of two parts, which is one is the impacts to the town and one is the impact to maybe the broader economy.
Yeah, sure. But I want to understand what metrics you have defined to determine this.
Well, so the information that we, I guess a couple things. So one is if we look at the impact to the lodging tax, for example, a lot of that information is private information. Some of it is public. AirDNA is a source of good data or decent data. And by looking at that, we can tell that, you know, we do have a shoulder season, right? And I think that's come up in some of the comments on some of the folks who are concerned about this article, right? And so I think that I'm not sure exactly what you want my answer to be like. So I'd say that that's a source of information, right?
Okay.
A source of information for, let's say, the health department and the way they've been using their resources. And I mean, actually, I will be answering these questions in your questions, Joanna, in the rest of these questions in different pieces. But there's information that was pulled from the town itself, let's say from the health department, right, on how they're using their own resources or how the police is using their own resources.
Right, but I guess at the point that I'm trying, this is a really complicated issue. And I would just like there to be like 3 or 4 points of metrics and data that you're using to come to these conclusions that everyone can understand and have the same perspective on.
Well, that's a fair question. So the first answer is the housing data, right? So it's census data that says that we're losing year-round homes at a clip that we're not able to replace. So that is, you know, hard data, right?
At the time, I have to jump in here, please.
I understand.
So, yeah, no, it just,
We appreciate we're Joanna, we will work on some guidelines for metrics. I'm taking notes.
thank you, Tobias. Peter Schaefer?
Yeah, I just want to tell the audience that every time they do a text, it shows up on everybody's screen.
A chat, yes.
Their chat, yeah.
People are chatting to all. Thank you, Peter. Good, okay. I'm gonna move on, Julia, because I think we'll come back to some of these issues in the further questions, as you said. So during our meeting on the 14th of January, 6 people mentioned they were in favor of the articles in principle, but not as currently written. So since January 14th, I mean, this has been maybe potentially a little bit more front of mind for people. Have you gotten modifications? And of those modifications, have you seriously considered any of them? You did mention at the opening of this that maybe it's time to work on putting some modifications in. I would offer that a month before the warrant has to be finalized, it's a little bit late, seeing as there's been issues arising on this since January. But fair enough, what modifications are you considering, understanding that there's only so much you can change within this article to be before you're outside of scope and then it's no longer appropriate?
So
Go ahead, Tobias.
You go, thank you.
yeah, so first off, we've heard significantly from the year-round community that the 90 days would be impactful on them. So we're strongly considering removing that from the article. You know, one of the goals of the article is to support more keeping money on the island. Another piece we are considering in the context of the shoulder season is the 7 days. Another piece that was talked about was the 1-car rule. And we've heard some conversations on both sides of that. Some people are like, well, the town is advocating for us to deal with our traffic problem. So it's a piece we're considering, perhaps going to 2 cars. Those are the 3 main pieces at this time. And then there is also, potentially a broader conversation to be had, but we'd like to hear more from you.
Thank you, Tobias. Finance Committee, Jill, you just raised your hand.
Denise, I'm sorry, I'm a little confused. Are we here to help them come up with an article that can pass at town meeting? Is that what this session is for?
No, this session, Jill, is to review it, to get answers to our questions that we had, to get any other questions that might come up out of the session that we're holding. And then from there, it is up to the sponsors to determine if they are going to make amendments, in the spirit of, let's all try to do the best we can for the island that we all care about. Then it's always productive to have constructive conversations. But at the end of the day, it's up to Tobias as the article sponsor to determine what modifications he may propose at town meeting floor to the moderator, and to decide if those are within scope. And John Giorgio, you're nowhere on a screen I can see, but I would also ask you to just confirm that what I just said, please.
Yes, Denise, I would concur with everything you just said. I would also point out that if any changes are going to be proposed by the petitioners, they need to be mindful of, I think you mentioned this earlier, the scope. And the moderator is going to have to determine whether any amendments made on town meeting floor are within the 4 corners of the article. And that test is whether the voters were properly warned of what might take place. So we will have to have a conversation, I would suggest, with the moderator once any specific amendments have been formulated.
Thank you, John. Peter?
Yeah, Tobias, have you guys considered revising it to grandfather what's on the island now and have maybe some sort of plan going forward for all new construction, so that the people that have second dwellings that need to pay their mortgages, et cetera, can do that? And anybody going forward that wants to do that will know ahead of time what the deal is.
Yeah, so that,
Wait a minute, Tobias. Peter just jumped ahead to question number 9.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. So Tobias, go ahead. I'm just pointing out that is question number 9, Peter.
well, thank you, Peter, for moving the meeting along very quickly. It was much faster than I would have hoped for. It's something initially 3 months ago when myself and our team in Act Now initially discussed the article, we talked about. But we are cognizant of what happened with the pool article, to ban pools, you might remember that, or new construction on pools, and how that created a whole disaster in the community. Also, my history with fishing, I'm very aware of how permits and grandfathering of permits has created some bizarre dynamics around them. Over the last month, a couple of folks have come to us with some good ideas around grandfathering that I think have merit, because the real intention of the article is to reduce the negative. We all know there's some negative impacts from short-term rentals, but there's also some positives, right? So we want to reduce those negatives, but also, if you can grandfather, have it set up in such a way that it doesn't create a bifurcated market where you have some properties that are businesses, they're grandfathered forever, and then other new properties cannot be short-term rentals in the future. So how they do it in the fishing industry is you get grandfathered in, but then if you give up your permit, it goes back into the pool. The same way we do moorings as a community, right? If you get a mooring permit, you got you're in. If someone gives it up, you can't transfer it to someone else. It goes back in the kitty. So I think there's some merits to that. I'd like to hear more from the FinCom members and members of the community, frankly, about it. I'm really serious, and Act Now is really serious about solving all the problems around short-term rentals. And I, as a 8th generation Nantucketer, want solutions that work for everybody. So I'm open to the conversation around grandfathering, but I also understand there are complexities around it as well.
Thank you, Tobias. Okay, I'm going to try to move this along a little bit. So how many, Julia, question number 3. How many short-term rental owners did you speak to individually?
So since starting this research that led to the white paper, which at this point we're talking about a year, we've spoken to approximately 100 homeowners. I can't say that I spoke to 100, but as a group, we've spoken to approximately 100. It's not close to 2,000. That's a lot of work, but that's what we've done. I'll let you read the next question if you like.
Yeah. Did you consult the Nantucket Lodging Association or the Nantucket Association of Real Estate Brokers?
We use the white paper as a tool to get feedback on the topic before even coming to potential regulations, and to talk about how do we legalize and regulate short-term rentals. So we did reach out to the Lodging Association and some of their members, and we reached out to individuals on NARAB and other real estate agents individually.
Okay, thank you. But on the white paper or on the warrant article itself?
Well, we use the white paper to talk about the research, if you like. So in some cases, we went back to the people twice, 3 times. In some cases, we went to the folks once with the white paper saying, we're going to be looking at a bylaw, we're interested in talking. So it depends on the situation, I guess.
Would you have expected to have had a different reaction if you had put the black and white warrant article in front of them than a white paper?
If you mean, I think in some cases, perhaps, sure. It's always, yes.
Yeah, usually when it's more tangible and people understand the specific what, then they have different feedback for you than a white paper. So that's why I was just curious as to where in the cycle of developing this that you got input from other important organizations within the community.
No, I think that's fair. And I think, part of it is this is a complicated issue, right?
There's no doubt about that. I think we can get 100% hands up on that if I was to do a straw poll right now. Do you know the seasonal demand for rental nights on Nantucket?
The total demand with hotels? No, not really. I think a lot of that, we can estimate the capacity. It's some of that information I don't have readily available from the lodging establishments, if you like.
Okay.
We can guess at a total.
So I did a rough calculation, liking numbers. And so with off-island owners having their capacity reduced to 45 days versus, let's say, 70 days. And I'll even drop it back down to 30% when it actually calculates to be about 35%. That, and I would assume that if they're renting for 70 days, that's 100% capacity, right? Because otherwise they would have rented for 5 weeks. And right now, nobody knows exactly all these numbers and they're imprecise. Having said all that, I would estimate that the supply is going to drop between, let's say, 20 and 30% with this article of available nights to stay in Nantucket. And so with that, how does the demand stop? Because people who are coming here aren't going to all of a sudden say, oh, now there's no availability, so I'm going to go to Martha's Vineyard instead, or I'm going to go to Block Island. So You see where I'm going with this?
Absolutely.
And so what is ACT now and what have you considered in respect of this?
I think one of the things that has to be considered is that not everything is booked 100% of the time that it's available, right? So the capacity rates, let's say the utilization rates are not 100%, right? So let's say a home is offered for all of August or all of July and all of June and all of September. It's not necessarily going to be rented 100% of the time, right?
But it will be rented for more than 6 weeks, Julia. I mean, I'm talking about the people who definitively rent for 10 weeks. So the 70 number versus the 45 number. So,
Right. So what I'm saying is it will push demand towards homes who may have been underutilized, right? So in terms of if let's say you had a year-round home, or let's say you even are a second homeowner, but we're not doing 6 weeks, or let's say you have a year-round home and you rent the back cottage of your secondary dwelling, right? It will push demand where supply was not being fully utilized. So it will certainly push demand towards, it would under as written, right? And I have to stress that as written, it would likely push demand towards inns and hotels in the shoulder season. You know, I just want to come back to the point that we're not drawing a hard line with this article, and you know, we had to put something out there. So that was our first move, I guess. And so to some degree, we also think, not we, but we also hear that the trend towards longer term stays is something that seems like it's going to continue for the next few years. So that would have been regardless of whether there's a short-term rental regulation or not.
okay, thank you. Finance Committee, any questions in respect of this particular topic? I don't see any hands raised. Good. I'll move on to my second part, question 4, which
Madam
is,
Chair,
yes,
there are 2 people with hands raised, just to let you know. I don't know how you want to.
okay, I'll tell them.
First up.
Michael Robinson and Ken Allen, we're not at the public comment section of this yet, so I need to get through all the questions for the FinCom, and then I need to get to the questions from the town, and then I will open it up to public comment. So,
I understand. I'm a bad listener. Now listen.
okay. This is not a judgment-free zone, Mr. Robinson, you're okay. So, back to Julia, there you are. Now you're on the left side of my screen. Thank you. Jumping around on me, Julia. Don't go, Julia. I need you. Have you considered the scenario where a homeowner says, in order for me to afford to keep this home, I need $50,000 of rental. I rented for 7 to 12 weeks every year. It was an affordable house. Lots of families came, but now I have to get $50,000 for 6.5 weeks. So now you're starting to price out the people that frankly were always part of the composition of what Nantucket was in the summer, or could potentially. Have you thought about that, and have you been able to have any ideas around that particular observation?
I think in that, in the situation that the question posed is a slightly different question than what you're posing. So I'm going to answer yours first. The short-term rentals, as we're talking about them, is obviously rentals of less than 1 month, and nothing would stop anyone from renting for a month on the side to supplement, for example, right? So if they absolutely needed to get more income, I think that what could be argued is that the question that we were posed initially included the question whether this was going to have an effect in putting making Nantucket more out of reach or less affordable to vacationing families. And I think that there's an argument to say that status quo is actually causing prices to rise, which we're seeing in the numbers. The prices are rising. And so why is it less affordable for families to vacation on Nantucket? And one of the reasons I'm sure there's a myriad of reasons, right? Clearly a lot of demand. But one of the reasons could also be that if we have more homeowners that are using their properties as a short-term rental business first and foremost, and they're focused on maximizing the price of a weekly rental, right? Because that's the objective. Then they put in a pool and add bathrooms and add bedrooms and all the amenities that will get them more revenue. And that could be one of the reasons why Nantucket is also becoming even more expensive. because the supply is becoming more expensive. So that was just a different view on the question.
Okay, thank you. FinCom, any other follow-up to that? Okay, at the Advisory Committee for Non-Voting Taxpayers on January 23rd, 2 off-island single-unit homeowners suggested that if this bylaw passes, they will have to sell their property. Do you have an idea of how many other people would be in this position? Have they reached out to you?
We've had some feedback from folks. I think you all have had feedback from folks who have said that exact statement. You know, we're not taking it lightly, frankly. It's hard to evaluate people's personal scenarios, and that's not what we want to do. We obviously hear that folks are saying this from a 30,000 foot perspective. It's not, you know, property values on Nantucket are clearly in a good place, and we don't see them being impacted severely. The real question is, you know, how many, sort of the, I guess the other side of the coin is how many year-round families are struggling with the high cost of housing on the island. And we know from, you know, whether it's the recent survey that the data platform did a couple of years ago for Remain, that was it like 2/3 of our households are basically spending half their paycheck or more on housing. So those are folks who are really hurting, right? And I guess the other thing I would point to is that the other communities that we've observed who have adopted regulations, or reasonable regulations at least, are still thriving. So we would hope that this, whatever article would pass at town meeting, would have the similar effect.
Peter Schaefer, did you want to ask a question? Because you,
Yeah, Julie, you're not really addressing the person who owns a house here, lives off island, might use it 3 weeks, 4 weeks a year, and rents it out the rest of the time. And they're not going to be able to pay their mortgage if they can't rent it out all the rest of the time. How do you address that?
Tobias, did you want to respond to
Yeah.
this?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a challenge, Peter. I'll be honest with you. But I do think it's currently, it is, I feel like a little disingenuous to say people who live here, who are struggling to afford it here, who pay an exorbitant amount of rent here, can't afford to live in one home. And as a community, we're supposed to subsidize a portion of folks' second homes. And there's a healthy relationship, I believe, between summer folk and year-round people, and we need to strike that. I am very concerned about some people being forced to sell if that truly is the case. And we need to find a way to craft it to make that feasible.
anyone
Yeah, I
else?
mean, that,
I'm sorry.
yeah, I would just say, David Hapley here. I mean, I
No,
think.
David, you can't speak, please.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'll
Yeah,
stop
that's
speaking.
okay. I will, I'll remind everybody, once we get through these questions, once we get through the town questions, once FinCom finishes and has no more questions, then I'm very excited to hear from everybody else. So, but not until then. So Jill?
Toby, I'm unsure, what are we subsidizing? What you're proposing is penalizing. And the people that own homes here are the taxpayers here. That is how we get town revenue. You're actually proposing to take what could be as much as $9 million from town revenue this year by the end of the year. That's what it looks like it might be projected. So what exactly are you subsidizing about the seasonal residents? I'm trying to understand.
I would say that it seems disingenuous, again, for us as a community to kick off local people, to not allow people to live here and have a vibrant community, because everybody on this call loves coming to Nantucket for the people. It's about people and the community. And I feel it's disingenuous to kick local people off so that then we can have more and more growth for people who rent their home out here seasonally. So I might look at it another way. if you rent to someone year round, okay, and you have a secondary property and you rent to them, you might rent it out at, and what's a reasonable rate for a 2-bedroom? $3,000 a month. So that's 36,000 a year, right? For a year-round folks. Well, you could improve the property and you could rent out short-term, and maybe you could get 45,000, 50,000 a year. So should we encourage, as a community, between summer folks and year-round people, should we encourage that dynamic to take place? And I don't think on both sides, we want that dynamic to continue.
But you're proposing something that's actually some of the money that's going to go towards the affordable housing that you so want built. And I think we all do, because we all do see a problem there. That money is going to be gone. How are you going to make that up? And the very people that work and take care of these homes, I mean, they might lose their jobs. That job might go away. So I'm just wondering, I mean, that's really why it goes back to the first question Denise asked about an economic impact study that I think is so important to understand the dynamic impact of this article. And that's what's really important to me to get to the bottom of, not, hey, can we as a group come together and find something that'll pass at town meeting? That's why I'm a little confused about today. I want to hear from people. I've read the letters. They're really outstanding. I hope you've read all the letters. I was really impacted by them. And I've only been coming here for 20 years. I'm getting letters from people who've generations and generations of families that I'm sure your family knows really well. And they're saying they have to sell. And I do consider them a member of the community, even if they cannot be registered to vote.
Thank you,
I agree.
Jill. Joanna, you raised your hand.
You know, I think, Tobias, what you're saying about that gap of people who are renting at a certain rate, and then the people make the improvements on the house and they can get more money for it. I think that this article doesn't really address that issue. I do think that that is the issue that you are trying to address. And I heard it before when we voted on the $20 million for the housing trust to buy properties. But I don't think the short-term rental issue or your article addresses that issue. And I think that there are some inequities, right, in terms of the second homeowners and the folks who can manage to afford a home here and then rent it out, who are year-round residents, right? So, I'm going to go back to, again, also what, similar to what Jill is saying and Denise said, without an economic impact study and real metrics around how this impacts the community and who the beneficiaries are, I just don't see that this is, I think that this is not a well thought out solution, right? And I think that there's another factor here that we are not even addressing, which is the pandemic, right? So in the last year, sort of the trend of second homeowners to stay here longer and to use their houses has already shrunk the rental market, right? They've stayed longer and used their homes. So I think that we have, these outliers of things that are happening that we don't know what the impact will be. And although I'm sure the intention of this was to help, right? I totally understand that. I think that it's too much, too fast, too far, right? So maybe dialing this back to, because I do think that you will get support from many people about some sort of regulation. But I think that this just goes too far.
Thank you, Joanna. So I've just taken a look at my 2 lists of questions, and we will be all night just on these questions. So I've decided that of all the questions that I have left, that none of them would actually change our deliberation, because I think these questions will come up through the people who want to speak. So I'm going to cut it to one more last question. And it's, how does this article, in the beginning of the article, it says, this article will ensure equity and sufficiency of year-round housing stock. So when you talk about the 600 homes that were previously year-round houses and are now short-term rentals, when they went on the market, they were available for another year-round person to buy. So I think it's a little bit disingenuous to say that the house is going from year-round to short-term when a year-round person could have bought that house. They're in the same marketplace as everyone else, right? Secondly, explain to me, as if I'm 5 years old, how this is actually going to create equity and sufficiency of year-round housing stock.
Okay, so two pieces on that, Denise. I think one is that for a 5-year-old's example, if you want to have, everybody wants to have their cake and to eat it too, okay? And residents have the option of buying property. However, since it is more valuable to rent property as an investment, not as a home to live in, we see a transition from homes that are owned as residents to investments. And that contributes to the shortage of staff we have at the fire department, at the hospital, the police station, etc. They are complex interactions, but we can all agree that the bottom of the housing market, the floor at which homes are bought and sold are at the bottom of the market, has greatly increased since short-term rentals became a business. Not the traditional short-term rentals that people have been doing for 50 years, but more the new investment short-term rentals.
I don't know that those correlate, Tobias, and I would absolutely want to see the analysis that proves there's a correlation to that.
Great.
Madam Chair, I could just give you a quick number. I mean, we talked a little bit about something and I wanted to bring it back. People ask us, is there really a link between off-island residents who operate short-term rentals, and are they really competing with year-round residents wanting to buy a home? And so what we did is we matched the assessor data with the registry and found that 30% of the short-term rentals owned by off-island residents are assessed under 1.25 million. That's over 450 properties. It's not to say that we think those are coming back into year-round hands. It's talking about what we're trying to protect going forward.
And assessed value, as we all know, and there's probably enough realtors on this call, on this meeting to correct me. We all know that assessed value is not market value in Nantucket. So, sure. Right. So again, some of the things, it's important that as we're looking at these kinds of things that we have data that's accurate and facts, facts kill opinions. And so far, we are missing tranches of information that would make the facts clear and would make us be able to say, well, this makes sense because it's X, and so therefore Y. So there's a lot of assumptions built in, and I understand that that's always the starting point for a good discussion. And, so that's just what kind of the point I wanted to make. FinCom, any last questions before I open it up to public comments? Because the town admin one, it's, how much will this cost the town to run, blah, blah, blah. I don't think any of that's actually quite material enough to be versus what we're going to hear from the public. So I'm going to skip over that part. So, Libby, you're off the hook, basically. So Finance Committee, and Ken, I know, Ken, I didn't get to hear from you, which is always my favorite. So Ken Bogrand is also off the hook. So
made my day, Denise.
Thank you, Ken. So any further comments from the Finance Committee before I open it up to comments from the floor? No? Okay. Well, Brian, I'm going to let you moderate this because you know who asked what first. I believe it's easier for you.
Well, the only hands raised currently right now, Madam Chair, are Stephen Morey and Rebecca Chapa, and Stephen raised his hand first.
Okay. Okay. Go ahead, Stephen. As a member of the public.
As a member of the public, but somebody who's been watching the hands, I just want to point out that Michael Robeson had his hand up maybe before me, but maybe on a different screen.
We'll get to Michael next, Stephen. So you go
Yeah,
ahead.
I was
Okay.
double muted. You go first.
Okay, thank you. So my question relates to where the conversation just left off with, how do we know that short-term rental investors are in fact squeezing out year-round homeowners? And there is data that's accessible and more nuanced than census tracts. You know, I read in the newsletters where we say there's 600 homes that have been lost over the last decade, and we're losing a house every 5.5 days, or some other shocking statistic. But then we can look at the real sales data, and we see that there were 46 sales below 890,000. And that number is important because that's the number that we've decided as a community is what's economically accessible to year-round residents. That's what's affordable to people who make at 150% of median income or less. So of those 46, it would seem to be pretty easy for Act Now with its resources to go back and tie those addresses to the short-term rental registry. And I wonder if that's been done. And just because there's so many people raising their hand, I want to ask my second question at the same time, which is, of the 2,215 short-term rentals that we have registered with the state, are any of those duplicates? I have clients at Congdon and Coleman who have registered their same property in an LLC and then maybe personally, or done something mistakenly. So they might be on that registry twice. I don't have a copy of the registry. What's available to me just shows street addresses without numbers. So I wonder if somebody can speak to that. Another example of how that might happen is if you sold a property after you registered it, I imagine it doesn't immediately fall off the state's registry, but the new owner would register it again. So maybe that would explain some of the 10% increase in registered short-term rentals over the last 6 months.
Thank you, Stephen. Mickey, I see you, and I'll get to you in turn, so you can put your hand down so you don't have to painfully sit there with your hand up. Thank you. And let's see, who would like to take that? Tobias or Julia?
I would like to take that, Madam Chair.
Please.
So Stephen, your first question was around affordability of year-round housing. We recently did some work with some of the local advocates, including some of the town folks and the affordable housing folks on, imagine this, we're actually looking at other things than short-term rentals. I just want to point that out. So looking at a structure for year-round inventory, and we were talking about affordability, and we're trying to look at things up to 200%, right? Because 150 is sort of where our programs end with a covenant, but in reality, if you're a teacher and a firefighter, you're above that 150 and you're closer to 200. So I'd say, at 200, what we're saying is they could afford a $1.2 million house. At least that's what sort of the numbers are showing. That's not what I'm saying. But anyway, so maybe your threshold is a bit lower, or is keeping some folks who might be in the market out of the market there. The answer about the registry and
actually, if you could just answer the first question, how many of the homes that sold last year or in the last few years below 1.2 million, if you don't want to use 890,000, how many of those homes are on the short-term rental registry?
I don't have that information right now. I could definitely look into it, but I don't have that information right now. What I have is of the registry, what's under 1.2 million, and that's the 450 properties.
Right, but that's 1.2 million assessed value, and homes are trading at slightly less than 140% of that number.
Sure.
Which isn't lost, I'm sure, on the board. Yeah.
No, but we are in a big bubble, right? But not everyone bought their house in the last 2 years. But yes,
yeah, but that data's been consistent for years going backward. And I know you have access to that data as well. But anyway, there's a lot of questions here, so we can get to the second one.
Stephen, I'll give another whack at it. When we did Neighborhood First, and you helped me with that significantly, looking at the data, it was about a third of the, I want to say, of the 20 homes we looked at roughly, I think it was either between 18 and 20. about a third of them went to short-term rentals. A third were transferred from year-rounders to investors. A third were summer homes transferred to other summer residents, and then a third were from residents to residents, roughly.
Thank
Okay, but
Tobias.
that was not a third that went to short-term rentals. That was a third that we determined went to seasonal residents, which is a difference.
Fair enough.
Thank you, Stephen.
Can
Laura,
I answer the second question, Stephen's second question?
quickly?
Yes, so there are some duplicates on the registry, Stephen, but they're very few. Where we see duplicates would be, let's say, if a property has separate listings for the front and the back house, sometimes they're registered under two different numbers, but typically it's one per property. We're not seeing many duplicates.
Can you dedupe that data and share it with the board?
The chair has the data.
Okay, so I guess, Madam Chair, if you would do that and let us know.
I won't be going through and checking for duplicates, just so we're clear. It's, with many things to do. When I took a look at it, I saw there was more than a few, Julia, but then again, I don't have the intelligence behind every single front and back of house. So, there's probably 50 to 100 duplicates on there, I would guess, doing the quick eyeball that I did. So anyway, probably not a material number. Michael Robinson, you've been patient.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Tobias, good to see you. Appreciate your comments. Very briefly, my wife and I have been coming to Island for about 20 years. Didn't get into short-term rental cottage side of this thing until about 7 years ago. And our experience has been a little bit different than some of the numbers that we're hearing. And I just want to make sure that if we have that incongruity, that we can kind of reconcile that. I think this all should be data-driven to achieve the goal, Tobias, that you guys are looking for, which is, in large part to solve the affordable housing or to at least improve it. And the company that we sold before we started coming to Nantucket for half the year, we were in about 50 different cities. Every single city we were involved with the councils, and it seemed that the most successful outcome for all the affordable housing cities that we worked with was to fund and build affordable housing rather than try to sort of structure what other private property owners do with their property. So it's something to just keep in mind when you're going to analyze the statistics here. The numbers that we see, we operate 9 months out of the year at about 90% capacity. Average stay of our guests is 2.8 days. It's not long. And it gets maybe up to 7 to 14 days during the July-August period. Our customers really enjoy it because they may come in the summertime and they have to spend a lot of money. They also like coming in the off season where they don't have to spend as much money. I think all the economy benefits by having that 9-month season instead of a 2-month season. The other thing that I find interesting is these statistics that we're hearing about occupancy. We're doing about 200 room nights a year spread over that 9-month period. And again, I think that can be beneficial as well. So we just want to make sure that those numbers, at least we can get some factual data on all of that before decisions are made. And I want to make a brief comment, something that hadn't been brought up in this meeting, but it has been an issue in other communities that we worked in, and that's, people misbehaving. We are in our 8,000th rental guest since we've been doing this for 7 years. We've not had a single complaint from a single neighbor. We've not had a single bad tenant, other than my own friends and family who stay with me. I mean, those are the only people who are causing problems in Nantucket. The renters are the best guests we could possibly imagine. So as we try to look for solutions to this, I would encourage us to make sure we're solving the problem. And if we can get more affordable housing on Nantucket, I don't know that if short-term rental was abolished in its entirety, would affordable housing problem go away in Nantucket. I think building affordable housing stock and finding a way to fund it is our best solution. And I think there's a tremendous amount of revenue that is coming in from the short-term rental business. And hopefully we can use data-driven statistics to come up with solutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Sylvia Hall, you had asked early on that you wanted to speak, so you're up next, please.
Hi, thank you. So hello there, I'm Sylvia Hall. I am a representative of Inspirato. And for y'all that don't know, Inspirato is a luxury destination club that offers memberships to individuals to access our collection of exclusive homes, which includes 6 homes located on the island of Nantucket. And I will say our members do love Nantucket. Now, Inspirato does not own its portfolio of homes, but rather we lease them from the local property owners. And in Nantucket, we solely rent seasonally, approximately 5 to 6 months per year, allowing the owners to utilize the homes the rest of the year. Now, Inspirato strongly opposes Warrant Article 90. As it's been discussed today, Nantucket is a community that thrives off of tourism. And Article 90, in our opinion, would devastate the tourism industry and many of the local businesses that support tourism, both directly and indirectly. Although we understand cities and towns must regulate certain industries and businesses from time to time, Article 90 is just too extreme. It won't just regulate, but rather, in my opinion, it's going to feel more like a ban, as most who have rental properties are not going to be able to afford to rent their home for only 30 to 45 days per year. Many popular cities and towns across the country still thrive while permitting short-term rentals to operate year-round. If Nantucket believes that short-term rental market requires additional regulation, as Tobias had mentioned earlier, they should follow in the footsteps of thousands of other cities and towns nationwide by implementing less drastic yet very impactful regulations. For example, require minimum night length stays, implement stricter quiet hours, implement a stricter short-term rental application process, or implement minimum ages for renters, or increase the lodging taxes, I think that was mentioned earlier, just to name a few. You know, based on Tobias's concern of the short-term rental growth rate, limit the number of permits offered in Nantucket so the number of short-term rentals can't grow just exponentially every year. Or as I believe Peter suggested, grandfather in existing permits. I think there is a lot of different options out there rather than Warrant Article 90 as written that will feel just as a ban. You know, as to
Sylvia, thank you. I think we got the essence, and there's so many hands raised, and I would like to make sure everybody has an opportunity. So you have 15 seconds to say one last thing, and then I'm moving on.
Okay, just as to employment concerns, you know, the ripple effect would be absolutely huge. It's not going to be just the homeowner's rental income, but all of the people who services the homes and tourism, from managers, repair companies, restaurants, private chefs, concierges, property managers. So we need to think about the big picture. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Sylvia. Okay, next up is Kathy Baird.
Myself there. Can you hear me now? Okay. I can't hear you now.
For everyone who speaks subsequently, please try to be 2 minutes or less. Try to hit your most important points, because it's more important that we hear from more of you than hear more from one of you. Thank you.
Okay, so I won't tell my whole story. There are so many other wonderful stories that you've seen in the letters. You've seen the diversity of the people who would be affected negatively by this. What I would like is to ask, if I could ask 2 questions. We really, I think, have agreed that we want to be data driven. We want to really focus on the facts, and it seems like there's just a lot of anecdotal information. And if we go back to the 600 homes that have been lost in Nantucket, when you look at the HUD data that is cited in the Act Now white paper, it says that those are basically, the HUD data says they're vacant homes. That's the way it's labeled on the graph. The exact same numbers appear in a graph that Act Now uses, and that is relabeled short-term rentals and investor and seasonal homes and investor and short-term rentals. So it's one big lump that HUD really can't make it figure out what's in that. It could be all trophy homes, and maybe that's why they're vacant on April 1st when the census is taken. Who knows? But that's the point. Nobody really knows, and I think what I've heard, everybody's asking, well, really, what does that number mean? The other question goes to the number of short-term rentals. Before the registry, what is the way that anybody knew how many short-term rentals there were on Nantucket? We now know there are 2,200, but the growth over the last 6 months could just as easily be explained as people realizing when they do their taxes and there's a new law that they have to comply with it. And so they're registering their properties. They were always short-term rentals. They just weren't registered. How many were in existence before July 2019 when the law went into effect? There could have been 3,000 short-term rentals. And people said, you know what? I don't want to deal with the taxes and the paperwork. I'm not going to do it anymore. So we really don't know what any of those numbers mean. And I think we need to.
Thank
before
you,
we
Pat.
make decisions.
Thank you. And like Sylvia did previously, she had actually had some suggestions, which I think is what Julia and Tobias are both looking for. So, so Kathy, I'm going to summarize what you said is to say there's just not clarity and we need better insight into the data. So that's the constructive suggestion that just came out of Kathy's comments. So thank you, Kathy. Who's up next is Rebecca. Please.
Thank you. I just had a quick statement. My name's Rebecca Chapa. My father immigrated to the United States from Mexico, and in his youth was a migrant farm worker picking crops. Yet through hard work and passion, he achieved his American dream, opening restaurants in Manhattan and Westchester. He visited me on Nantucket in 1992, the summer that I worked at the Brotherhood. He couldn't stay here for a full week because he had to get back to work. But in that brief visit, I could not fathom that a photo of us at Children's Beach would one day become the backdrop for my own dream. So today I operate the concession there, which is called the Hungry Minnow. And it was purchasing a home here on Nantucket that set the scene for my dream to come true. So I live in a 4-bedroom home on Macy's Lane near the airport year round. It's modest, but it's comfortable. And upon viewing it, I immediately recognized that the configuration would allow me to rent the home so I can make ends meet here. From mid-May through Stroll, I rent the upstairs 3 bedrooms on Airbnb, and I hunker down in a basement apartment. I don't grill, I don't sit in the backyard. I'm too busy working anyway, but it's the only way that I can afford the cost of maintaining the property and living on the island full time. I don't allow parties, but we do sometimes endure long nights listening to banter, laughter, and occasional bouts of singing. That said, we are their only audience because they keep the windows closed with respect to the neighbors, and they apologize the next morning if they're off key. My guests are not lavish. They walk to our home from the airport. They take the wave. They rent bikes. Families with small kids, college reunions, groups of friends needing to hang out to get away from the city for a few days. The minimum stay is 2 nights because I remember being young and having to manage my spending of money and time away from work. This proposition would be disastrous to me. As a small business owner, it would restrict a huge swath of my customers. Furthermore, it would unfairly restrict the type of people who are allowed to visit Nantucket, a place that has historically embraced economic, religious, and cultural diversity. Nantucket's founders purchased Nantucket from Thomas Mayhew, not only as a business venture, but also to escape repressive conditions and religious persecution, specifically because Thomas Macy was found to have lodged Quakers in his home. Proposition 90's restrictions on days rented and minimum stay would effectively limit who I can lodge in my home. For me, short-term rental is not for business, but rather for my survival. Living full-time on a seasonal island is financially challenging, and the proposed restrictions would not encourage me to rent year-round, but rather would force me to consider whether I can afford to continue to make Nantucket my permanent home. So I beg of you to please respect the legacy of Nantucket's founders. Nantucket has been a haven from oppression and persecution. Do not suppress my rights to rent my property, thereby crushing my Nantucket dream.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you.
Mickey, I'm not even going to try your last name, so please. Oh, and I keep forgetting, everyone should say their name before they start. Rebecca, you did. So Mickey, you can pronounce your last name better than I can.
Hold on. Percentage. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? I think I'm unmuted.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I'll be quick because I know what it's like to run meetings like this. First of all, my trajectory on Nantucket is like a lot of other people's. I came here, fell in love, rented, finally was able to buy. But the only way I can own my house is that I rent it for 7 to 8 weeks every summer. I'm here on island practically every month except January and February. So I don't understand how my having, let's say, 8 weeks to 10 weeks of renters is going to do anything to support people who need year-round homes. I'm in Nashua-Quisset. I don't have room to build anything else. Our lots are small. They're very carefully circumscribed. Many of our owners have taken their homes out of the rental market because they're living there full time. Several of the last sales have been to teachers and others who are full-time residents. So when you talk about things leaving the rental market, there are those houses as well. I also don't think anybody's spoken to anyone in Ashaquisset about how we all live there. We're only allowed to rent 7 days at a time, no short-term rentals like 2 and 3 nights. Secondly, I have some experience with land use. And what I see is this is a land use issue, that we need to build housing, that taking someone's secondary dwelling and saying this can't be an income producer for you is kind of off topic when you need to really develop something that's going to be full-time, year-round, substantial housing for people who really need it. And to me, that's land use. To me, density is an issue. You have to develop denser housing. I know this is a long, complicated topic, but I really think we are not helping the people who need housing by limiting folks like me who rent a few months out of the year and then have all their things in their house. Who's going to rent my house with all my things in it? Nobody's going to do that. So it doesn't do anything at all to mitigate the problems of long-term year-round housing.
Thank you, Mickey.
Very muddled.
Thank you. Okay. Jamie Howarth.
Hi, thank you for the meeting. I'm Jamie Howers. I've been on the island now off and on since 1991, and I've been a rental agent and sales agent here for close to 20 years. And previously was at time land use. I was a planning board member and zoning board member in suburban New York, where we were running into some of the same kind of pressures for the younger folks in our community who were having hard time participating in the housing market in a rapidly gentrifying area. So I have a tremendous amount of concern about this. When we were first owners here, my partner and I did rent to local over the winter time, and eventually migrated here full time. And as I say, I've been doing this, doing rentals for 20 years. The 4 years, in the 20 years, the 4 words I've never, ever heard are "get me mid-island" or "get me Glowacki land." No vacation rental has ever asked me to rent those areas. And those are the areas that are the most dense with locals and will continue and persist to be. And so I'm having a really, really hard time understanding where the crossover is between areas that are vacation and short-term rental and how this is even an issue. It's just not likely that the demand for those products, it's a different product, it's a completely different product. The real competitor and the issue is the scarcity of the marketable property. And a lot of that has to do with the land use with regard to the land bank. Two suggestions I would make, one of which might be to consider whether affordable housing possibly could be found among some of the areas that are held off. I mean, we have so much apartments building out out by the airport. There's so many other projects of Surfside Crossing that might come to pass. We'll probably end up with a surplus, it seems to me, relatively quickly. But I guess the other suggestion that I would have would be, as far as a metric is concerned, the duplication is obviously a problem, but also the crossover between areas that are traditionally vacation and traditionally short-term rental and traditionally long-term local. I'd love to see a density metric as to how much demand there has been for vacation rentals on Appleton Road or on Somerset Lane. I mean, I just don't see how it's realistic for the Act Now folks to ignore the fact that demographically and as far as locale is concerned, there's not going to be short-term vacation rental property on Appleton, and it's not the best possible use for Cliff Road. It's unrealistic. Thank you.
Jamie. Thank you very much. Kathy Westbury.
Thank you, Kathy Lima Westbury now. Thank you, Madam Chair, for allowing me to speak. I would ask that you consider some of the unintended consequences of Article 90. I'm actually one of those outliers that Joanna spoke of. My family history dates back to the 19th century, and my husband and I were both teachers. I'm sorry?
There's some background noise on somebody, but it's not me, Kathy. Keep going.
Okay, but my husband and I were both school teachers, and we would scrimp as a young couple, and we'd save for 3 years till we had enough to make it to the island for just a couple of weeks. Then we were fortunate enough to buy a home out by the airport, and the only way I can pay that mortgage is to rent that house out in August, usually just 3, sometimes 4 weeks. Which,
Kathy, hold on a second. Henry, can you please go on mute? Henry Sanford, thank you. Go ahead, Kathy.
Thank you. Which, you know, renting those few weeks amazingly pays for half the mortgage. And then we work with Nantucket Public Schools, and we rent from September through the end of the school year to an education employee for a more than fair rate. Because we've recognized the housing difficulty, and that's why we try to be a part of the solution and not part of the problem. Trust me, we're not making money on the house, but this particular plan, it allows me to be a part of that place that I've loved since childhood, and it lets me pass on that love to the next generation. Here's the unintended consequence for me. Yes, I'm going to be under that threshold for the number of nights to be rented, but after the lodging tax, which nearly doubled my premium for insurance, this $500 registration fee, plus who knows what else is going to accompany that, it becomes a tipping point for us where it just doesn't make sense to rent it out for just those 3 weeks. Too many headaches. I might as well keep August for myself and make that money up by raising the rent on my September to June renter, which unfortunately is going to keep them in the shuffle, unable to save for their dream home. We have been honored to be part of at least a half a dozen or so renters' stories and realizing their dream of home ownership on this island. So, you know, call it a drop in the bucket. It's, you know, a half dozen or so people, but, you know, it mattered to them. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Kathy. Stephen Cohen, and, you know, the same for everyone. Thank you for being reasonably brief, everybody. So over to you, Stephen, you're up next.
Great, thank you, Denise. You know, I am an attorney, but I am not representing a client here. I'm speaking personally as Stephen Cohen. So I have a number of points, and I'll try to just stick to the top few. One is that, you know, frankly, I find everything that Act Now is saying to be highly offensive, because if you boil down what they're saying that the problem with Nantucket is the Nantucketers, that the people who live here, that work here, are using up all the services to service the rich people, and that's the problem with Nantucket, is how crowded we're making it and how expensive we are. And I just find that to be highly offensive. The other thing is that everything that's being said is irrelevant to the basis on which it's being said. There's no connection between the short-term rentals and all of these points that we're making about whether people are for or against affordable housing and whether or not, you know, like this is just a big pile of words that there's no data here connecting them. You know, but I want to make 2 points. One is that this article has significant legal issues. For example, it is purported to be a bylaw, but it clearly is a zoning article because it creates new legal uses. The building commissioner and the zoning board of appeals and Nantucket's current bylaw do not have a commercial use for residential use of a property. It has already been decided that a short-term residential use, a primary owner use, a vacation rental use, a secondary home use are all residential. So this is creating a new zoning code without going through the proper planning board channels and zoning bylaw proposal. So it also has legal issues where it's treating people on and off Nantucket differently in violation of, I think, state and federal and constitutional law. It has a number of legal issues that should be addressed by town council. aside from that, if you just boil down to the concept of making short-term rentals less available to people, and think about what the obvious impact of that is it means that people who have more money can be in the short-term rental business, and people who have less money can't be. It doesn't make more houses less expensive so that year-round people can buy them. It makes them accessible to people who have more means, who can drive the prices up and who don't need financing and who can rely on less rent. That's how basic economics works. You don't need a white paper to figure that out. So what that means is that someone like me and my wife, who started our family on Nantucket 16 years ago and absolutely could not have afforded one house, but were able to make a go into the housing market by having a house and a cottage that we rented out, that would be foreclosed to us. And if you look, the predominant and primary vehicle for local Nantucket families to get into the housing market is having the ability to do rentals on the side. And that is how people get into the housing market. And so if you take away short-term rentals or regulate that capacity, you're just saying people who have more means can do it. And then, frankly, it's the same thing for more middle class and lower upper class families who want to come to Nantucket. If you're a dentist and you want to buy a house on Nantucket because you live in wherever, having the ability to do some of those rentals is how you make it work. So what we're saying is, if you're a local family, we're going to take away this option from you. And if you're an off-island family who's not uber rich, we're going to take away this option for you. So it's still available to the super rich people who can afford to do less, who don't need it. So there's just, it's practically nonsense to suggest that limiting short-term rentals is somehow creating more affordable housing. If anything, it's creating housing that's only affordable to richer people who can rely on renting less weeks at more money. You don't need to be an economist to do this math. The other thing is that when you limit the number of weeks, you're driving up the value of those weeks, you're driving up the cost of those weeks, you're driving up the premium on those weeks, and you're hyper-focusing those weeks into the best time. So what you're doing is basically saying all of our short-term rentals are going to be just during the key weeks of the summer. You're killing your shoulder season, you're killing your festival season, you're killing your wedding season, and you're saying everybody should max out their limited number of weeks during that 6-week period in August where you make the most money. By limiting to 7-day exclusive minimums, you're saying we can't do long weekend rentals in the fall. We're saying we can't do festival rentals, in the shoulder season. You're saying we can't have families who want to come and rent a house for a wedding for 4 days where they just come for a long weekend. Oh, no, you can't do that. You want to get married, you want to rent a house on Nantucket for your kid's wedding, got to come for a week. Otherwise, you're going to stay at a hotel. None of this makes any sense for how our economy works, and none of it has anything to do with affordable housing, and none of it has any benefit for anybody who's not rich enough to ignore it.
Thank you, Stephen.
I really appreciate the intent, but there's no correlation between the intent and what's proposed.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you.
Susanna Sheehan.
Hi, my name is Susanna Sheehan. We own a house in Nantucket, and I want to thank the Finance Committee for its thoughtful consideration of Article 90. I am opposed to Article 90. I just want to say, has any consideration been given to taking some or all of the $6 million rental tax and using it to build affordable housing? That's my question. Thank you.
So Susanna, that's Monday's meeting. So tune in, same place, same time on Monday, and we'll be talking about that. So thank you for your question. Lark Jacobs.
Yes, hello. Thank you all very much for the opportunity to speak. I'm going to be very brief because Stephen Cohen really did a far better job than I could have on most of my highlights. And I am so grateful, Stephen, for your voice in putting forth those thoughtful, insightful, and in my estimation, very correct opinions. I just want to, in a nutshell, say, as a family, I've been here almost 30 years. We started for the first almost 10 doing the Nantucket Shuffle because we purchased a non-winterized home, and just similar stories you've heard, but we help pay our mortgage by doing our rental, and I think everything that Stephen just said, the inadvertent effect that I see happening here is, as Stephen pointed out, that the island homes become sold off to the super wealthy who can afford to not rent. That creates a ghost community that you guys are exactly trying to avoid. That's in a nutshell. And the other thing I'd like to say is that one last thing is that the event of COVID, hopefully we'll see, things will calm down in another year. But I do feel that there will be long-term effects. And one of the things that made a lot of these sales is that people want to have longer term places, I think, to get out of the cities, et cetera. You see how much was sold in New York City. So I think that at this moment in time, unless there's a really serious study done, which really can't be done comprehensively now because we don't know what the effects will be on people's movements with their homes because of COVID, I think it's a faulty time to start messing with the economy just on that basis alone. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lark. Rick Atherton, you're next in line.
Here we go. Sorry, I had to. Denise?
I can hear you, Rick. Go ahead.
Can you hear me? Oh, great. Okay.
I can hear you.
Yeah, I didn't know if I would be in line before 6:30, Denise. Look, I just wanted to say this is obviously an important community issue, and it's not just about one topic or another. One thing I would hope it leads to, and the Finance Committee and other town officials can be helpful here, is that you support a continued dialogue about this, and as you say, getting the proper information before all of us. Without knowing exactly, I was struck by the loss of year-round housing. And I think we need to find out if that's correct. And if it is, that's an issue the community ought to be concerned about. And I think we want to say thank you to someone like Act Now for bringing this issue forward so that we can all focus on it and hopefully find a solution, if there's one necessary, that leads in the right direction. So thanks for your efforts here. It's not an easy topic.
Thank you, Rick. Mike, let's see, who was next? Zach Porini, you're up next, Zach.
Hey, how you doing? I just have one quick point that I wanted to make. If these draconian rental restrictions are to go into place, I would like the sponsors of the warrant to consider the very people that you want to help by creating more long-term housing will be hurt when you curtail the amount of rentals that can be done. When you reduce the amount of people who can come to the island, reduce the amount of short-term rentals, you will hurt the economy, therein hurting the exact people who you say you want to be able to afford housing. I don't see the correlation between these two issues. I don't think there is any. So that's my point. Thank you.
Thank you, Zach. Paul and Karen, and I'll ask everybody who still has their hand up, of which there's 1, 2, 3, 4. Please be brief and please say something new. Thank you. Paul and Karen, I only see Flanette, so I don't know the rest of your last name. I'm sorry, but you're up next. Or not. Okay, then I'm going to move over to Ron Kokut.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, for the opportunity to voice a comment. I want to start by saying comments that I would make have already been supremely well done by both Mr. Cohen and Mr. Robeson, and I second those comments wholeheartedly. So the only thing I would like to add at this point is it seems to me that Act Now's original goal of preventing the pure 100% off-island investor from buying houses and thereby choking out the year-round resident opportunities to do so, is the goal is frustrated when you lump in people like myself who have been a summer resident of Nantucket since 1984. And the last thing in the world that I am is a off-island investor. And so I think that the effort to address the ultimate goal should be rethought through a lens of really segmenting pure investors and second homeowners who love Nantucket and rent out their property for a short period of time to be able to afford it. And with that, I'll yield back the microphone, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you very much. I'm going to take 4 more comments, and then I'm going to put a line under the comments for today so that the Finance Committee can go back to deliberating this article. So I will start with Ryan Castle.
Thank you very much. I'm Ryan Castle. I'm the CEO of the Cape Cod and Islands Association of Realtors representing Cape Cod, Martha's Vineyard, and Nantucket. We believe that the bylaw should be clarified by town council to say whether it's a zoning bylaw or not. It's written as a general bylaw, and we believe it is a zoning bylaw because it regulates the use of land. It also regulates the use of parking. And if you look at a recent court case with the town of Barnstable, regulations on the use of parking should be a zoning bylaw. And as such, we're asking that town council look at it to determine that whether this should be a zoning bylaw, and as such need 2/3 vote at town meeting rather than a general bylaw. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. Paul and Karen Flanagan. Now I can see your whole name.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, members of the Finance Committee, for your questions. Tobias and Julia talk about the housing crisis on the island of Nantucket, but the problem is clearly not unique to Nantucket or even Massachusetts for that matter. You could insert housing crisis Salem, housing crisis Provincetown, housing crisis Summit County, Colorado. So it seems like they're inserting a nationwide crisis to attack short-term rentals on Nantucket without any direct linkage between the short-term rentals and the housing crisis. So rather than act now giving us their data, it would seem like most appropriate for an independent study on this issue to determine if there's any relationship. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul and Karen. Michael Berry.
Hi, thanks. Just 2 quick comments. It's not just pay my mortgage, but I paid $53,000 last year to local services, $23,000 to landscaping, $12,000 to caretaking, $12,000 to cleaning. That cleaning is directly tied to the turnover of rental properties. We don't rent it out for the full summer. We do take some income in the shoulder season. So one proposal I would have is, why not a 1% additional tax on sales for the way in? There was 1.9 billion of sales volume last year. That would raise nearly $20 million. And that could go entirely to affordable housing.
Thank you, Michael. And Henry Sanford, you're up and you are the last one, please.
Wow, lucky me. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, distinguished board members. It's good to be on the other side of the table right now. And I just want to leave with 2 things. The first is that the town has thoughtful and already conceived affordable housing plans. If you talk to the town leaders about what they need for affordable housing, it is always money. So this does not help that. I agree. I don't think this is even a housing article. I'm not sure why it was written as such. Everything to me says land use. The second thing is I want to bring from a real estate sales perspective. When someone becomes unable to own one of their most valuable assets, which for homeowners on Nantucket, that's what their homes are. It's one of their most valuable assets. They will not slide back into an affordable rental situation. They will not do a year-round situation because that then prohibits their use. What they will do is they will turn around and sell it at its highest possible value, as is their right. This is what Act Now is not considering. They're not considering the unintended consequences of their article, and they are also ignoring, as far as I can tell, the massive negative multiplier that our previous speaker just mentioned of what happens when you start constricting how people come to the island. It makes it harder for people of youth to own homes. Airbnb is the millennial toolkit for home equity. I mean, it just kicks that right out up from under them, but it also prevents younger people and people of less means from visiting our island. So the people who will be hurt the most by this will have the least means. The corporate investor, however they define it, they still haven't, will not be hurt. They have large access to funds, they have access to institutional debt, they can hold on, they can make it work, because these investments aren't giant cash cows. What they are is a store of wealth and generally a tax planning mechanism. So it just, there's no correlation. I reject Act Now saying that they have engaged the community. They have not engaged NARAB directly. They used anecdotal evidence throughout most of their presentations at this meeting and others. I find the whole process flawed, and I just really hope that we can get an independent study done, because we need to stop demonizing 80% of our homeowners as being the problem. You know, right now, everyone has the attention. We have the attention right now. So we have the ability to do something. Let's use that short-term rental tax and fund the programs in existence. Let's talk about equity sharing. Let's talk about down payment assistance. Let's not talk about using prohibition, which we can all see does not work in any levels of policy, to fixing the problem and to demonize essentially what is really the lifeblood of our economy. So thank you so much. And I really appreciate listening to me.
Thank you, Henry. I mean, one thing I'd just like to make clear, this is not a referendum on how Act Now proposed this article and did all this work. So I think we should, I would like us to stay in the frame that, you know, they're doing the best that they can and the best way that they can with the data that they have. And then it's up to us to discuss and debate and understand if we have enough information. So I'd like us to, you know, kind of stay fair in this process. For the people who put up their hands, I'm sorry, I had said a minute ago I was taking 4, and I'm at my limit of 4, so I'm not going to take any more comments from the public at this point in time. Thank you very much. I very much appreciate all of the active participation. I have a question for John Giorgio, which is, John, to the point that Ryan brought up, is there anything in that we should be considering as we start our deliberations?
Madam Chair, are you referring to the statement that this should be a zoning article rather than
Correct.
a
Yes,
general bylaw?
Yeah. Yes, John.
So we were asked to review this bylaw proposal, and we had extensive comments and concerns about the way this bylaw was originally drafted. And we provided a letter to the select board and to the finance committee. And subsequent to that, the bylaw was actually substantially amended, I believe, primarily to address the concerns that town council had. We did not raise that concern in our review of this bylaw. If you want an opinion on that, we can provide it, but we did not see that. We did not raise that issue when we reviewed this.
Perfect. That's what I needed. Thank you, John. Okay. So I am now closing the public comment section of the meeting. Thank you, everyone, for all of the public comments and for the people who had constructive feedback in terms of what are some things to look at. I very much appreciate that approach. And it's, you know, it's always good to hear what's on the top of people's minds. So, Finance Committee. Now, General Peter Schaefer, you're up.
Okay, first off, I think Stephen Cohn created a new social class, lower upper class. So pretty interesting. I really would like to hear what Tobias and Julia have to say after hearing from 40 people and hearing their opinions. Where do you stand?
Thanks, Peter. You can call me Toby, and anybody out there who still does, it's I take it as an enduring fact that you still call me Toby. Myself and Act Now is very cognizant of, we want to have a bylaw be successful at town meeting, and we want it to be successful for everyone, for the whole community. I think there's a number of other concerns around short-term rentals that we didn't necessarily address at this meeting. I think there was a lot of focus on the correlation between short-term rentals and affordable housing. And, we look forward to flushing that out more. I do feel like everybody has some concerns around short-term rentals, and as a community, we're not reaching a consensus yet on what we should do as a community. I feel like at this point, it would be nice to kind of step back. I've definitely personally enjoyed hearing everybody's great concerns. I can say that, 5 years ago, I would never see 152 people all of a sudden be so supportive of affordable housing. So I'm glad to hear that. But I do think there is a balance to strike here. And I know the team at Act Now and myself are going to be working to strike that balance, because we really honestly believe that there is a balance to be struck. I'm not sure, given some of the concerns around this article, how we've crafted it. I'm not sure, speaking with the town moderator, that we'd be able to redraft it in an appropriate manner. But I will reach out to her, and we'll work to deliver an article that everybody can get behind. So I really appreciate everybody's comments and thoughts. I take them really seriously. I'm very empathetic to all of you who have called in, and I really appreciate the dialogue. So thank you.
Thank you, Tobias. Anyone else on FinCom? Okay, so do I have a motion?
I move not to adopt.
Do I have a second?
A second.
Okay, is there further discussion on the motion? No? Okay, by roll call. Joe Grouse?
Madam Chair,
Yes, Tobias?
just a brief question. When we went through the neighborhood first process, I believe we had 4 or 5 FinCom meetings. I know there's a busy schedule. I'm not exactly sure what the objective of the FinCom is. Just voting outright no at this point in time, when we haven't written down any amendments in that we'd like to propose in a clear format. That's the board's decision if they'd like to vote up or down at this point. Totally understand that. Just wasn't expecting the board to vote this evening. So thank you.
Thank you, Tobias. This is our second meeting on this, and this has been an extensive meeting, number one. Number two, it's when I asked if there's any further information or comments from the members of FinCom, if they needed any further information, or are they comfortable with what they know already to be able to make a motion, then we're taking the motion. We have a busy schedule, as you rightfully pointed out. And so at this point, and then any amendments you would be putting forward on town floor in any case, and that would be and making a positive motion to if this motion passes, you would be making a positive motion with amendments for consideration at town meeting floor. John Giorgio, I'm going to look to you to confirm that I got that right again, because you are more experienced in this than
Yes,
I will ever be.
Yes, Madam Chair. Of course, you've got a second. It's pretty good.
John,
But-
wait, David Hafler,
Seri-
David Hafler, please go on mute. Thank you.
But seriously, if the Finance Committee takes a vote now, and let's assume for a moment that's not to adopt, I don't think that would preclude the petitioners from continuing to work on a different version of this bylaw, and perhaps could bring it back to the Finance Committee. I think we all have to be cognizant of the fact that the Finance Committee has to complete its deliberations and votes by the end of March in order to meet the printing schedule. But there would be nothing to prevent the Finance Committee from offering a technical amendment at town meeting. Should you be presented with a revised bylaw that you thought would work or would be appropriate or would be in the best interest. So I think voting not to adopt sends a message about this bylaw that perhaps you want to send. I'm just getting that sense from the discussion, but that would not prohibit or prevent the Finance Committee from considering a different bylaw that the petitioners may want to present to you before town meeting.
Thank you, John. Tobias, does that clear it up for you?
And that's totally fine. I'm very sensitive to everyone's time, so I understand that.
Thank you. Okay, so we had a motion from Joe. We had Joanna.
I just have a couple comments. I think that, I think 2 or 3 points. One of which is that it's my understanding, Tobias, even if we all vote on this tonight and it's not favorable, that any one of us in the majority can reopen the conversation at any point for the rest of the month, right? Isn't that the point of order?
Correct.
Yes. Number 2, I think as the bylaw is written, which I think I said a little while ago, I can't support it because I think there's too many things in it. So in the effort to come from a place of neutrality, right? Not in duality, like it's all bad, right? Like I don't want to do that. Like go back and figure out what you can separate to make it something that people can support. Because I think you heard, as we have all heard from many people, that it penalizes people too severely, particularly the year-round homeowners and even the second homeowners who struggle to get that house. So the way the article is written, I cannot support it. But that doesn't mean that we don't encourage you to come back again with some other methodology that maybe is, I think you also heard this tonight, rooted in a little bit more economic impact study, factual nature, where we can understand the impact to the town.
Thank you, Joanna. Is there any other comments from anybody else in FinCom before we move to a vote? I see no other hands raised, so I will start with you, Joe Grouse. And the motion you're voting on is move not to adopt.
Yes, move not to adopt. Yeah, I vote aye.
Thank you. Jill Veith.
Aye.
Joanna.
Aye.
Peter Schaefer.
Aye.
George, are you still on? You're not on my front screen. George Harrington, you might have stepped off. Denise Cronow, aye.
I'm here, Joe. I'm here and I vote aye.
Thank you, George. Okay, that passes unanimously. And sitting here in the dark, I texted my husband to come down and turn on lights, but he hasn't yet. So at our date of, so we have an article, we have an item that's reviewing discussion of other articles, but really we're trying to do this by schedule. So unless someone raises their hand urgently to discuss a different article, I'm going to push that forward to our next meeting. We have meetings every Monday, Tuesday, Thursday for the month of March, starting at 4 o'clock. Our next meeting will be Monday, March 8th. And for the people who are interested, that will be the articles that are all related to affordable housing. So that is the topic for Mondays. Those are all the articles related to that. So I would encourage 167 people to come. Joanna?
So who's coming from those other articles on Monday?
Joanna, I don't have that list right in front of me and I won't be able to find it in time.
Okay.
So Brooke Moore will be coming, Arthur Reed will be coming, the town will be coming. So those top of mind, and then anyone else obviously who wants to come. Okay, thank you, Joanna. I didn't have that notes exactly in front of me. Thank you. And Jill, did you raise your hand as well?
Yeah, I just want to be clear about, we've taken this vote on this and now it sounds like there's a potential for it to be reopened sometime this month. Is that what I'm hearing? And the reason I'm saying that is just so that you can explain to the public, because there are so many people here who might feel like they need to keep monitoring.
Thank you, Jill. So what happens now is that Lynn, the public comment piece of this program is over. So I'm sorry, I can't reopen that. Thank you. Or let's put it this way, I'm not reopening it. So what happens now is like we had a couple years ago when we voted not to adopt, and then the sponsor came and asked us if we'd reopen. I, as one of the people who'd voted in the majority, said we could reopen it. And then we take a vote at FinCom as to whether we want to reopen it. And the FinCom voted, no, we do not want to reopen it. So, you know, the option to reopen it is available to any sponsor for any vote. And obviously for the negative votes, not the positive votes. I don't think they ask us to reopen positive motions. just to be crystal clear here. And so that's available to anybody that we voted, you know, either take no action or motion not to adopt on our prior motions. And so that's available. And if it is, we will post it on the agenda. If you know, Tobias and Julia, you give me a heads up that you would like to, you know, come back in front of us and ask us to reconsider, then I'll make sure it's on the agenda so folks know. And yeah, as I said, we're in finance committee meetings 3 times a week from now until the end of March. So at 4 o'clock, always, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday. So it'd be nice to have a few more participants. Maybe 160 is a bit beyond my capabilities of flipping through, but so good. So again, thank you to Julia and Tobias for bringing this forward and for discussing it so constructively with us. Thank you for answering the questions as I had for you in preparation. And thanks to all of FinCom for your hard work on this, particularly call out to Rick Sears, who's done a great job of getting this information posted on the town's website for us. And thank you for all your letters, which were posted so everybody could see them. And there's nothing better than engaged citizens. So this is a really constructive evening. Now, may I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
So can I have a second?
Second.
Second. And with that, I will do roll call. Peter Schaefer.
Aye.
George Harrington.
Aye.
Thank you. Joe Grouse.
Aye.
Jill Veith.
Aye.
Stephen Morey, you can adjourn now. You're no longer a private citizen.
Hey, thank you for welcoming me back. Aye, adjourn, please.
Denise Crono, aye. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, Denise. Bye.